In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all of the things that I've learned about behaviour management for the last 5 years. Now, I think behaviour management is actually one of the hardest things to get your head around in regards to the way that you approach this within the classroom. I know for myself, my PGCE year, that at times this is something that I struggled with, and that's because I didn't necessarily know what my teaching style was going to be, but not in regards just to the way that I teach, but also in regards to the way that I engage, motivate and instill behaviour expectations within the classroom. What I'm going to be talking about in this video are all the aspects that I learned in my early few years of teaching. One of the first things that I think I realised quite quickly, and something that I try to establish every single year, is being consistent. Now, it is really difficult to be consistent in regards to any walk of life. However, being consistent with your behaviour management and the way that you approach those consequence situations are particularly important. I think kids really focus on the idea of fairness. Whenever I speak to the pupils that I teach, or pupils in my form, for example, they're always talking about fairness. I'm not saying that, you need to be ruthless in the classroom. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later in the video. However, it's really recognising that what I learned is you can't be in the situation that you give a detention one day for one thing and the next day you don't give another child a detention for the thing that that child got a detention for the day previously. It can start to cause problems in the classroom. Secondly, think about your approach with the pupils that you are teaching. Now, this applies to any kind of setting, primary or secondary. However, when you're teaching, especially more than one class, the dynamics of every single class is going to be slightly different. And sometimes your approach might alter slightly depending upon the pupils that you have in front of you. That doesn't mean that every classroom I go into, I'm becoming a different person, or I'm doing one thing with one class that I wouldn't do with necessarily another class. It's thinking about the pupils that you have in front of you and the way that you want to approach scenarios that are going to keep them motivated, going to keep them engaged, and actually allow those boundaries and expectations to be established within the classroom. I think this is definitely important in regards to establishing those pupil-teacher boundaries within the classroom, but also instilling those expectations from the get-go. Next, make sure, and this kind of links towards what I was just saying about your dynamic with pupils, make sure that you set your boundaries and your expectations early on. Now, this is something that I faltered with when it came towards my NQT with 1 or 2 classes. I teach lots of different classes. On average, I teach about 20 different Key Stage 3 classes a fortnight, where I work at a fortnightly timetable, on top of my GCSE and my A-level classes, which I usually have at least 2 GCSE classes and 2 A-level classes. So I learnt this very early on in regards to some of the classes that I taught, that because I didn't instill my expectations and my boundaries early on, it became a lot more difficult to do that later on in the process. I think pupils, unfortunately, they will kind of trial and they will try to see what they can and can't get away with at an early stage. This can actually really work in your favour, particularly if you are new, because that child or those group of children have no idea who you are, what your expectations are like. So rather than see this as a daunting process, really think about having this as a way to utilise early on, getting those expectations in the classroom and setting those boundaries for yourself. But of course, make sure it's something that you are comfortable with. Now, in regards to the school that you work with, they might have a behaviour policy and expectations that they expect generally from the pupils within the classroom. However, outside of that, think about what you're comfortable with in regards to how you want to manage and how you want to set those expectations within your classroom. One of the things that I think sometimes we can overthink and be worried about, especially as new teachers, is thinking about our teacher persona to the pupils. Sometimes they can feel a need to impress pupils or to come across as being likeable. And of course, I guess that this is a massive bonus with your pupils in regards to if they come to your lessons and they like the teacher. That's great. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. However, it's finding that balance in regards to what you find authentic, what you feel comfortable with, but also making sure, like I said previously, that you set those boundaries in place. I think the best dynamic that you can have with pupils is that they respect you, they enjoy your lessons. It's a mutual respect kind of situation in regards to enjoying the class, them enjoying what you're bringing to the table, but also both sides of the coin, knowing and understanding the expectations that are in place with behaviour. You don't want it to fall slightly more towards the remit of it being too likeable that they seem like your best friend because you are the adult. I didn't realise early on the power of going to go and see other teachers and how potentially they approach behaviour circumstances. I found this very, very effective early on in my teaching career in regards to perhaps pupils that I was finding I didn't necessarily have as an effective dynamic in the classroom as other pupils. And I would sometimes sit there and think, is it something that I've said? Is there something that I've done? What's happening here? And sometimes going to see that pupil outside of the context of your own subject can just allow you to see and identify what they're like elsewhere. You might pick some useful tips up, but also going to speak to other teachers or other members of staff. Sometimes it might be that there's just something that you don't know about a child, and sometimes that information can really help you with thinking about the right way to not only approach the situation, but allow that teacher-pupil dialogue to essentially progress within the classroom. Don't feel afraid that you have to do things all the time on your own. Just because in some circumstances you might contact or need support from another member of staff does not make you come across as being weak. Actually, in any school, and pupils know that there is a hierarchy in regards to if there was a problem with the child that you were teaching, who would they go to next? Now, I'm not saying every single time that you come across an obstacle, you're always wanting to call the person next in line, because pupils will start to identify that you might not have as much control as necessarily you might want to have control over that situation. However, it's being mindful that there are quite a few circumstances that actually having that hierarchy present can really make a difference in regards to the pupils being aware of people being in the loop. Now, I don't mean this in regards to saying that the people, you know, I don't think any member of staff, whether they're a head teacher or, you know, even if it's just a TA, I don't think it's saying that one person necessarily has more control over pupils or more power over pupils than others. However, what I find actually really beneficial is sometimes having another member of staff speak to a pupil might allow a different method of approach to be applied that perhaps isn't exactly working with you and that pupil at the given time. Also, there are just going to be those scenarios where you need extra support and you need extra help, and that's okay. Every teacher does this. It's not just you. So don't think that asking for support, whether that's from your senior leadership team, your head of department, your head teacher, means that you can't manage your classes, because you can. And the last thing I'm going to say is be yourself. Don't feel like you've got to completely change your personality just because you are now teaching. Of course, there are going to be levels of professionalism that you need to apply within the classroom. However, pupils come up to me all the time and, you know, they sometimes might ask, Miss, how was your weekend? Miss, what did you do? What did you do over half term? Oh, Miss, what's your favourite musical, etc., etc. What have you been watching on the telly? And I think that this is actually a great interpersonal dialogue that you can have with pupils, because they're realising you're a person and you're not just a robot that lives in the cupboard. Don't feel like you've got to completely separate yourself from the job, because that isn't necessarily the case. In the same way as that actually being yourself can allow pupils to sometimes see you as being somebody that's a little bit more approachable. Being somebody that actually is approachable for pupils is very important in regards to those pupil dialogues that you want to be having within the classroom. So there you go. Those are just a few things that I've learned about behaviour management along the way. There isn't an approach that suits everyone. So I didn't want to exactly tackle approaches in regards to behaviour management, because this is what will very much suit you and what you feel comfortable with. If I talk about, you know, within the last few years of teaching, my approaches have slightly changed every single year, and I'm still experimenting and thinking about which approaches suit me and which are most effective for the pupils that I teach. So don't feel like you've got to stick at behaviour approaches just because you've seen somebody else do it. Think about what suits you. If today's video has been useful, please give me a like or a comment. It gives me a really good indication that these videos continue to be useful to those of you who are watching. I hope you have a lovely working week, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.